Good afternoon. Welcome. Doesn't matter what the weather is, you're in Billsville now. In case you don't remember what I looked like 50 years ago, Greg Peterson, reunion chair. Thanks for coming. The world is run by those who show up, so are reunions. This is the first ever reunion panel done virtually. And Reg Pierce, our MC, is going to explain how we pulled this off. It wasn't easy, but we had a willing victim from the West Coast. So without further ado, Reg Pierce is going to take us through this.
Good afternoon. That's how to get it off my chest. Tucky, can you hear me? Nate, do we hook him in or not? Just keep him in the dark for a while.
Reg, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, dude. Tucky, can you see me or no? No, you're hiding behind the screen.
I guess we need to
Don't move, don't move.
share the screen.
He's got his tech assist there. Okay. So, a little background. As my wife says, Reg, cut the back. But I'm going to make it quick. I got my old roommates here. They know about stories I've told. But in all honesty, Greg and I started talking about this almost a year ago. But the problem was, how are you going to convince Tuck to do this? He's done it all the time. He's not coming to the reunion. So we said, well, let's see if we can do a little Zoom action. So we figured we could do that. And to really help ice the deal, my bride Casey's sitting over here, and I flew to Santa Barbara, where they live, California. Never been. Stayed 3 days with them. A lot of drinks, a lot of sitting out by the pool, a lot of persuasion. But I said, Tuck, you got to be the man. It's Professor Tucker unleashed. That's the concept I have. Can you deliver? He goes,
Reg?
well, I don't know, Reg. He goes, Maggie says,
Reg?
no way he's going to do that. No, he's too busy. So
Reg?
anyway, I said, well, we'll work on you. Right, Tuck? True story so far? He's playing with me now. Okay, all right, that's okay. Fortunately, he's got a tech assist there. We got Nate, so when in trouble, we got Nate over there. So anyway, so we got out there, and I said, you just do it. So we started talking about an outline.
Nate, Paul.
Long story short,
Here, Reg.
come March, we had a discussion. We sort of laid it out a little bit. We put it out publicly, and then the pressure got on. So we had a couple of calls, and this week we had a practice call, Greg and I. Nate was standing right here on the X. I was home in Philadelphia, outside of Philadelphia. And Tuck was in Santa Barbara. And where was Greg? Were you at home then? Yep, by then? No, you were on the road. He pulled in a Starbucks somewhere between and here and home. So we're here today to see the wizard of this college's art history department coming way back. And Tuck, I don't want to take too much time for you, so I could be here all day. But I'm going to just hold off on some of the old stories. We'll save that for the cocktail parties. But I now turn it over to my old friend, number 70, left tackle, Paul Tucker.
Reg, can you hear me?
They can hear you, Tuck.
That's great. Well, Reg, thank you for a wonderful introduction. I couldn't hear a word, but thank you so much. And thank you, fellow classmates, friends from afar. I feel terrible about not being there with you. Been one of the great joys of my life, and certainly being able to chat with you about the world of art and the like has also been a real treat. But as perhaps Reg says, I have this wedding of what is essentially is a second son here that occurs on Saturday, and we are inundated actually with Massachusetts people to be able to celebrate this, since he was born and raised in Charlestown, as Boston strong, and was Jonathan's oldest friend. So alas, my ties, unfortunately, to family kept me here. But I'm thrilled to be able to chat with you this afternoon. This is kind of an embarrassing talk. If it has any merits, even if it has any kind of impact, no matter how temporal it may be, it really is due to Greg and Reg, who beat the living bejeebies out of me to be able to say something And I hope that whatever occurs over the next 40 minutes or so will be both amusing and perhaps enlightening. I also have to pay homage to our wonderful president, Mr. J.R. LePan, who maintained a wonderful distance in terms of trying to push me into this activity, but has been so magisterial in his activities for this reunion. So hats off to all of them, and thanks ever so much to Nate and his team who have been able to make this this technological event occur. So I wanted to be able to talk about, as this title seems to imply, a few tales of both sordid and wonderful details over the last 50 odd years. Some of it is embarrassingly personal, and I hope you will forgive me at the beginning. Others get into the issues of the art world at the present, which is as crazy as the world itself, no surprise. And then we'll end with a few thoughts about Williams itself. But I would encourage anyone in the audience, I assume Pinky is there and therefore may have a few comments along the way. I would encourage any kind of banter or shout outs, as we had so enjoyed during the last time there in the biology lab. And even though I can't hear you from here, Reg can communicate something, because I want to keep this as loosey-goosey as has always been our norm. But over the, daisy, okay, now why is this not advancing? Hold on, oh, there we go. I think we can all admit that when we first came to Williams back in 1968, to this Village Beautiful, that we were deeply impressed, obviously, with the physical environment, with many of our colleagues, of course, and probably, as many of us have said, impressed with the fact that we were even there. Like, how did we get here? Were we part of that 10%? What kind of value are we bringing to this extraordinarily august institution? But we have an amazing class. We've achieved so many things. There's so many interesting people in our class. And so one of the things that occurred to me was thinking not so much about how we got here, but how we got out. I happen to have found the commencement exercise announcement here from 1972. You may recall it was not held in Mission Park because it rained. But in any case, it stirred in me thoughts about the notion of what really occurred at Williams and what led us to where we are, serendipitous as it perhaps may be, a la Ferris Bueller. When I first came, as I'm sure like many of you, I took lots of different courses because I had come from a fairly strict high school and I had no idea what a psychology course might be or what it might be like to have a Skinner box with the rat that we see in the upper left-hand corner, or Jane Goodall with her wonderful apes there on the left as well. So I took a psychology course, I took a primate behavior course, I took a calculus course because I had done extremely well in college, in high school in math, and thought I could smoke that one. I loved history, and I thought I was going to be a high school history teacher, so I took a variety of history courses, particularly with Bob Waite. Not always such a good idea when it came to disciplinary committee activities, but nonetheless, he was an amazing teacher. And then I took these art courses, and that was a bit of a revelation. I came from a large family in New York. There was too many kids, so we never got dragged around the museums. I had no idea what art history was at all. But of course, with the troika there in the upper right-hand corner, I learned fairly quickly about its magic. Now, the problem with all of this is that, and this is where it gets to be slightly embarrassing, slightly personal, is that I asked Williams for my transcript from our 4 years together, because I wanted to remember some of the courses that may have slipped my mind. And it was a revelation as much as Thomas Mann's Magic Mountain was. In fact, it is crazy and embarrassing. And I show it to you here in all of its painful and truthful facts and figures. For example, I can't believe the number of C's I got. Holy mackerel. In fact, I got a C in my, I think it must have been my junior year probably from Lane Faison, in paintings in the upper right-hand corner there, painting and sculpture 1785 to 1900. I got a C. That's my field. How could I possibly have performed so poorly? And there's that D, my very first semester there, Intro to Calculus. Boy, did that bomb. And it bombed because I was probably so arrogant thinking that, I know this stuff. And in fact, the first half of the course I did. And then I thought, well, I'm just going to cruise to the end. Well, the cruise ship sank. And I can still remember the bloody room in Bronfman where that tragedy occurred. And I think a D was probably a generous grade on the part of whoever the professor was, many of whom I don't remember. So the whole transcript is littered with these C's and B minuses and everything else. I felt like, gosh, I never took a course with B. Bar Beale, but he certainly was my handmaiden here. In any case, that was really quite startling. So I think here we are in 1972. I get out with barely a reasonable grades because my senior year obviously did much better. I'm like, what happened? How did this occur that I could go in 1972 and then actually go to a place like Yale? And in essentially 6 years, because I took a year off, 6 years, actually research and write a PhD and graduate with all of these illustrious people, including fabulous folks who received honorary degrees that particular year, like Baryshnikov and Venturi and so on and so forth. How did that happen? How did it happen? Well, in some ways, it is the mysteries of Forrest Bueller. I would, of course, want to say with absolute pure self-indulgence that it naturally was a way for me to be able to grow closer to who Maggie always says I'm actually channeling. And that is that I actually did become able to tell the difference between a Manet and a Monet. And although maybe in our old age, as we sit here on the porch, that may become a problem in the future. At the moment, it's not. In addition, even though this never occurred to me in a museum, but I do know who died of syphilis. And so therefore, I would not embarrass those who are there in their aesthetic wonders looking at a Manet or a Monet. In addition, one of the marvelous things, although it becomes a kind of continuous history affair, to be able to tell the difference between a Monet and a Manet or a Monet and a wannabe. And I'm sure from many of you who took 101 or any other art history courses that you'd be able to identify which one in this particular comparison is the Monet and which one is the aspirant. It happens to be the one on the right-hand side, which was sent to me just 2 weeks ago by a woman who actually had worked in I.M. Pei's architectural office, is a very sophisticated woman and who's now living in Italy and believes that this was, in fact, a long-lost Monet from his Venice campaign, one example of which I show you there on the left-hand side. I get these inquiries literally every couple of weeks and try to let them down as softly as possible. I wrote a long letter to the woman on the right, and needless to say, I have not heard from her. I could shamelessly say that all this is due to my family, which of course would be true. My lovely wife, now going on 49 years. Could we have a hand? I won't even be able to hear, but can we have a hand for Miss Maggie? Thank you. I see you. Thank you. Thank you. And breathe deep, breathe deep. And 2 great kids. But, that's certainly true. Support is always necessary in all these things. But one of the most amazing transformations occurred, like with our dear classmate and friend Debbie Rucci, a summer in Florence, which was encouraged by the Troika there in the upper right-hand corner, where I took 2 courses with professors in the city itself. It was fantastic. And I said, if this is really what you can do for a lifetime, this is what I want to do. Holy mackerel, how fantastic could it be to spend your life looking at some of the greatest works of art that the humans ever made? So when I came back to Williams, that's what I did. Took a lot of art history courses to make up the difference because I thought I was going to be a history major. That allowed us to give tours at the Clark Art Institute, which was fantastic. I fell in love with Monet, and particularly the Rouen Cathedral there on the right-hand side. a picture which had been George Hamilton, the first director of the museum's first purchase when he took over the directorship. I'd always ended my tours with the romantic undergraduate notion that it would be terrific to reunite those cathedral pictures that Monet had shown in 1895, 20 of which startled the Parisian public in that year. They never had been regathered. But that, in fact, became one of the great moments in my life because actually in 1990, we had been able to gather 11 of them for an exhibition in Boston, Chicago, and the Royal Academy in London. If I got hit by a crosstown bus in New York after the show, life would have been just fine. It was a huge, great, unbelievable thrill for me. In fact, it also had other thrills because how could you ever make it into the New Yorker as a cartoon? So I thought that that too was something that would have to ultimately go down as a tombstone kind of epitaph. But the bottom line is that Monet has really been a great ally and continued from the Clark on through after graduation. I got a job at the Toledo Museum in Ohio. And the Webbs, of course, Willard, alas, and many of his siblings and his family were long generation Williams folks. And they put me up when I first arrived there. Toledo, if you have not been, you should go. It is an amazing museum, one of the top 10 museums in this country. And I essentially went as a glorified tour guide. Williams has actually had a long connection to the Toledo Museum. Roger Mandel, alas, who died just 2 years ago, class of 63, was director of the museum from 1977 to 86. And Bill Hutton, class of 50, another art history major from Williams, was the chief curator there from 1971, just before I arrived, to 1992. And thirdly, Charlie Gunther, a class of 55, became the head of education there in 1958 and was the head of that department until his retirement in 1990. So it was a long legacy, and I feel I really profited from that. In fact, Charlie was the one who gave me the job, which essentially meant being a tour guide, really a glorified docent. And it was terrific because you had to learn about all kinds of different stuff that we had not covered in Williams in various courses, about American art with Thomas Cole in the upper left-hand side, about copies of the David, both of the Horatii there in the center. It has one of the great El Grecos down below. It has the best still life that Pizarro ever painted there on the left-hand side, a fabulous Monet water lily, one of the most terrific Hans Holbeins there on the right-hand side, and the largest and most important Peter Paul Rubens in the United States, which you see there in the upper right as well. So a fabulous collection. I mean, really an unbelievable collection. And it was a museum dedicated to the public of Toledo. The main director, Otto Whitman, had always said, listen, we're going to make a museum that is really for our local public. We're not going to be there as a kind of tourist attraction for the world. If we buy things correctly, if we, in fact, also have programming that is popular, people will come. And I would urge you to come if you have not. One of the other things that they were very keen on was education, which is why they had established this docent program for recent college graduates that was supported at the time by the NEA. And we had to give tours, as you see tours being given throughout the museum every day to all kinds of folks, from elementary school kids through to our geriatric group. And it was marvelous. It really made you be able to speak in front of diverse people and to be able to learn things that may be far from your field. And there were a couple of really amazing occurrences. Sorry. Hold on. This is terrible. I still get choked up. Breathe deep, right, Reg? Breathe
No,
deep.
no, you
Breathe deep.
take a deep breath. Take a deep breath.
Think good thoughts. Think good
Inhale,
thoughts.
exhale.
Breathe deep.
You got it.
All right, exhale, exhale.
You're back. You're back.
So there were a group of special needs kids, and we had a terrific time for an hour. They all walk into this room. They see this piece of sculpture. It's a Henry Moore. And what do? They run to the piece of sculpture while the guards are in the room, and they jump on the piece of sculpture. They're like having the best time. The guard is going crazy. I'm like, whoa, my job is on the line here. What am I going to do? So I said, okay, everybody line up. Just line up here. There were about 8 or 10 of them. Line up. And I would pick them up and I would put them inside the sculpture up here. They'd slide down the inside. They'd stick their heads out here. They'd come out over here and I'd plop them out. And we did it over and again. And that was the end of the tour. The guard was ballistic, all right? I went over to him. I explained the situation. I said, I'm going to see the chief curator right now. I went to see Bill Hutton, who was not a man of a lot of words, I have to say. I hardly ever talked about Williams, which was very strange. In any case, I explained what had happened. Now, of course, the piece at one time it had been outside, and he was so kind. He simply said, Paul, I understand. The next time, have them take their shoes off. It underscored how important art was on the most fundamental level, how it touches humans in ways which we hardly ever know. It makes old men cry. In any case, Toledo was very special also because ironically in 1974 was the place where I gave my first public lecture in a auditorium called the Peristyle, which I show you here. Huge hall. This hall seats 1,775 people. And it's the home of the Toledo Symphony and so on and so forth. And that February, it was a snowy night. That February, this auditorium was almost packed. It was unbelievable. And I was a nobody. But they came because they were interested in art. And the kind of loyalty that Toledo had to its museum was amazing. It also, as some of you may know, was a very rich town. Why? Because it was the center of glass making in America. It had made plate glass for years. It had made glass for buildings and all kinds of things. In fact, it made every piece of glass for every automobile coming out of Detroit. It also made all the tumblers that we have used and broken at parties over all these decades. Every single one of these tumblers were coming out of factories there in Toledo. So guess what? They had mucho dineros. They were extremely rich. And what was also wonderful was that they were extraordinarily generous to the museum, in part because the museum had established an educational program where it was the first in the country where every kid in the public elementary schools would come to the museum at least once during their career in elementary school. So there was kind of allegiance to it all. And the founder of the museum, Edward Drummond Libby, who ironically also came to Ojai out here in California and did all kinds of work here in California, left his fortune to the museum. So they had money to buy fantastic works of art, and they had terrific directors over the years, Roger Mandel included, who bought superb works of art. It's not a huge collection, but it's comprehensive, and it has works of the finest order. So with all of this money, it really was able to establish itself within the larger matrix and hierarchy of American museums. However, here's a transition. They, nor any other museum, could possibly compete in today's market. It's just completely unreasonable. Why? Because as some of you may have seen, prices have escalated to an extraordinary, astronomical, inconceivable level. For example, just 2 weeks ago, this silk screen of Marilyn Monroe a fraction of the size that you see in front of you, sold at Christie's for, are you ready? $195 million. $195 million. And you simply hang it on your wall. And on top of that, it's not even a painting. It's a silk screen. And I'm sure Ernie Smith will be able to give you a rap about silk screen versus paintings. But nonetheless, it is not a paint. It's not a Rembrandt. It's not a Monet. It's not a surface that has got all that kind of richness of pigment that we so love in looking at a painting. $195 million. It was bought by Larry Gagosian together with a guy named Mugrabi, who owns over 400 Warhols. So we're in a very strange moment where there is too much money on the one hand and too few works of art, so that they are fought over with this kind of contestation that places everything in some kind of ethereal space. And that auction was so mind-boggling, as you can see here, as it was being knocked down at Christie's, that the next day, published photographs were reversed. So that they're backwards, as you can see from the writing of Christie's and of the signs in the background there. And that's a perfect metaphor. Things are turned completely around in a way that seemed to have no relationship to reality. That very same night, there was also an auction prior to the auction of the Maryland of a collection by Anne Bass, who was married to Sid Bass. And the two of them, although they got divorced, amassed a huge fortune in the oil and gas business out of Texas. She moved to New York, and the two of them had a fantastic group of paintings. Anne died a couple of years ago and was selling 12 pictures from her collection to be able to support a variety of very worthy philanthropic goals. The collection itself contained 3 Monets, one of which I show you here. It was, of course, highly marketed by Christie's to be able to generate considerable interest, and it included all kinds of things. For example, including a beautiful video that Christie's made of Anne Bass's apartment on Fifth Avenue in New York. I'm going to play this video. It's 38 seconds worth. You can see 2 Rothkos on either side. You see that same Monet Houses of Parliament picture in the distance there. You'll see 2 Degas and other Monets. I had the privilege of going to this apartment in 1988 to be able to try to borrow one of these Monets for Monet in the 90s exhibition. And I'll give you a rap about that after our little tour. So here we go. Chopin, take it away. Just 1 second here. So you see, as you come into the dining room here, you see the painting in front of you. Look around it. It's all mirrors. And the frame on the painting itself is also like a mirror. I'll return to that in just a second. Here we go. See, there's mirrors on either side here. Again, a mirror-like frame. And look over here on the left-hand side, these mirrors there that fit the windows here on the right. One more little frame here. Beautiful poplar painting. You see other mirrors around this water lily here. Voila. And here's the big picture. Bingo, bingo, bingo. And there you go. So let's just see. Now, in the spirit of full transparency, I actually participated in part in the promotion of this collection by being invited by Christie's to give a rap the week before the exhibition with the head of the sale, Max Carter, who's actually the son of Graydon Carter, who had been the head of Vanity Fair for many years. In any case, those mirrors around the pictures made for an extraordinary environment in Anne Bass's dining room because, as the butler demonstrated to me when I was there, you close the shutters that had those mirrors on it. You turn the lights off, you close the doors into the living room that had mirrors on the back of it, and you are in a completely mirrored environment. And so that when you turned on the lights designed by a Texan lighting authority, the paintings pinpointed with these lights looked like holograms. It was the most bizarre, unnerving, enchanting, insane, and beautiful experience I've ever seen in any work of art. It was also just a little weird. It'd be hard to figure out how to eat your fried chicken with these things hovering over you like hens in the sky. In any case, the pictures did extraordinarily well, as you could well imagine. The collection itself actually earned $363.1 million, which contributed to the overall sale totals of $843.7 million for one night's event. The Monet that you see in front of you made a record of $76 million, $76 million that you're going to put on your wall. It's just astonishing to me. Monet, I'm sure, would be very proud, but it places things in a very bizarre state that will be hard to be able to rectify. There are a couple of other collectors who are also interesting to be able to share with you. For example, the man on the right-hand side, Dr. Rao, R-A-U, who was an amazing guy, sole member of a family, who was a doctor who started a children's hospital in Uganda and spent half of his year in Uganda in a hospital that he himself built with his family funds, and then half the year in Zurich. So you may remember that I had chased him down. The man on the left-hand side is from UNICEF, and he's holding a reproduction of a Renoir. But I had chased Dr. Rao down in the mid-90s to be able to borrow this fantastic Monet for an exhibition I was doing in Japan. And we went for lunch at a wonderful restaurant in Zurich, proceeded to consume 2 bottles of wine, which put Dr. Rao completely oblivious. We got in a taxi to go to the Zurich Museum to be able to see some of his paintings where they were on exhibition. He passed out in the taxi on my shoulder. I had to get out of the taxi as he fell onto the second seat of the taxi, because I had to get a wheelchair to wheel him around the museum itself. During most of the time, he was only half awake. It was an amazing
Anything
experience.
for a sale,
he was
right?
a wonderful guy. He was a wonderful guy. Some of the Williams, of course, training allowed me to consume those 2 bottles of wine and still be able to push himself. So he did lend this picture, for which I was very generous. When he came to figure out what he was going to do with the collection, he gave it all to UNICEF to be able to sell or use as they want. Now, the collection was totally bizarre. It had just the weirdest things. He had absolutely no advice from anybody. He chose whatever he wanted, and unfortunately was amazingly eclectic with only a few things of value, like the Monet we just saw. The Monet went on the block. It was bought by a entrepreneur in Canada, not our dear friend Jack Curtin, but another guy lives in Ottawa. And the museum in Ottawa did a whole exhibition around it. On the right-hand side is a catalog that they produce, a beautiful catalog. And it was a big deal for them. In fact, the director of the museum, Sasha Suba, who you see on the far left-hand side, again, a Williams woman, has just this past week, some of you may have seen, been appointed as the director of the Philadelphia Museum, a huge achievement on her part. And the show itself was going to be a big achievement. She's really a terrific, talented woman. Philadelphia will be very proud to have her. However, I tell this story because about a year after this exhibition occurred, what does the entrepreneur do? Even though he had promised a long-term loan of this painting to the museum, he puts it on the market privately and wants to sell it for easily a huge profit, almost double the price that he paid for it. It hasn't sold yet, as far as I know, but what he did was he completely exploited the needs of the museum and the notion of using a space that is in some ways separated from commerce to be able to increase his own personal wealth, which I have found very distasteful, to say the least. I just met Sasha literally a month ago in New York, and we talked about this very issue with great sadness. In any case, it goes both ways too, because, for example, this painting by one of Monet's best friends, Gustave Caillebotte, is a fantastic portrait of this very dandy guy sitting here in this blue striped couch, looking very debonair, but very relaxed. It's a marvelous picture. It was owned by a major financier in New York, and it was in an exhibition here in the United States a couple of years ago, and caught the attention of the curators at the Getty Museum here in California. We were able to find out who actually owned the picture. It took a long time, but after 6 months of rooting around, we actually got the owner to agree to lend it to the museum, with the possibility of the museum actually buying the painting. And there it is on the walls of the Getty. And it looked terrific. And as you can see, it is in fact a sizable picture, and it holds its own against the one on the left-hand side. This one here is a painting by Renoir that costs about $28 million. John Walsh bought it back in the 1990s. And this painting here was the most recent acquisition by the Getty. It's a painting by Monet, and it cost them $82 million. And it holds its own between those two, and it was far less expensive than either one of them. Well, it's a long story. I'll bore you later at some other time over many adult liquids. But in the end, the Getty passed on it. And essentially, among one of the reasons it appears is they wanted something more famous as an image, something more iconic, quote unquote. Well, a couple of years went by, and lo and behold, what came on the market but a quote unquote iconic Caillebotte, which is this one here, a young man in front of his window. It's a painting that you can see is a relatively reasonable size on the left-hand side. It's a painting that actually also has a Williams connection, because on the left-hand side is a photograph taken by none other than the great art historian class of 66. No, actually, maybe it must have been class of 66, Kurt Varnedoe, who went on to the Museum of Modern Art, among other things. That is a friend of his standing in front of that very same window in the very same apartment, because Kirk had made the first exhibition of Caillebotte here in the United States in 1976, and had borrowed this very same painting. And in fact, the painting now you can get in all kinds of couch environments. You can get it in a more modern couch there on the left. You can get it in a slightly puffed up one, or with colors, or with potted plants there up on the right. You can get it on a t-shirt, you can get it on a mug, you can get it on your apron, you can get it there with your dog even. What I love most is actually this right here, which is a reproduction that you can get made by Isabelle, Maison de Qualité, depuis 1995. You get the young man at his window, and you can actually get this painting within 5 weeks. How great is that? Holy mackerel. You know, forget the amount of money you're going to pay. You can have your own right there, done in hand by our fine professional and talent. I love the fact they have to say talent artist. Oh my God. In any case, anything goes now, right? Well, this went for $53 million, which was about 5 times as much as any other Caillebotte had ever been sold, and the Getty purchased it. Well, what did they purchase? Well, they purchased a painting. Yes, it is more iconic. It's in all these kinds of things, but it's a painting that actually is layered with meaning. And in the next two things we'll look at, it's all really about meaning and how we know what we're looking at. In this particular case, we know that this is actually Caillebotte's brother, René, and he's standing not at his window, but at his parents' window in a building, a 4-story building that his father built on an empty lot in a new developing section of Paris in the 1860s. They were very wealthy. He's looking down on the street. It is often said this is typical of art history of years ago, that he's actually looking at this woman here upon the street, which is a typical kind of male way of looking at the whole picture, and is often still repeated. That may be true, but there's also other kinds of meanings here. In fact, we know that after this painting was painted in 1876, 6 months after it was painted, René died. We don't know how he died, but we do know from his inventory, which was necessitated by French law, that he was deeply in debt, like seriously in debt. even to his tailor, to the guy who made the suit that he's standing in. We don't, because of the privacy issues, we don't know how he died, but it is more than likely he committed suicide. So we are looking at someone who may be, and you don't commit suicide on a moment's notice. We may be actually looking at someone who is in a kind of desperate situation, who maintains a kind of authority, male authority in particular, but a false kind of authority. Indeed, even his wealth itself was inherited. He didn't make the money. He, in fact, at this particular moment, is squandering the money. So all of a sudden, this picture becomes very strange indeed, particularly because the family, this is an image of the Caillebotte tomb in Père Lachaise in Paris with the portrait of Gustave on the door there. They could not say that it would be suicide. And I contacted the family members who have survived, and they say they don't know, and there's no record of it, but they couldn't say it was suicide because otherwise he wouldn't have been able to have a Catholic ceremony and buried in an appropriate fashion. It also would have been a huge embarrassment to the family. So this painting, which the Getty bought, as I say, for this huge sum, and it's not hanging yet because it has also conservation problems, is layered with meaning. I think some of you may remember the hour we spent, or at least 15 minutes of an hour we spent looking at the Warhol Campbell soup can in the Williams College Art Collection a while ago, and the various meanings that it contains. I'd like to, in the last 10 minutes, move from this can to another set of cans, perhaps a little bit closer to the kind that would have been consumed during our time at Williams. A piece of sculpture that's simply called Painted Bronze, and it's by the wonderful American patriarch artist whose name is Jasper Johns, who's now 92 years old, the subject of a huge double retrospective in Philadelphia and New York last year, and is really widely acknowledged as our most important continuously living productive artist. Of course, if he wasn't living, he wouldn't be productive as well, I suppose. In any case, it is a piece which was made in 1960. There are two casts of it, and it literally is painted bronze, and they're the exact same size as Ballantine cans. They, in fact, occupied the very center of the exhibition at the Whitney Museum in New York in a case that you see here. Out from it radiated various panels. In fact, the curator at the Whitney said this piece of sculpture was the most important piece in the entire exhibition. Well, it needs a little unpacking, it seemed to me, because just like with Campbell's soup can, there's much more to be said about this. First and foremost, of course, as we look at it, it does seem like it is a set of beer cans. But in point of fact, they really are not beer cans, and they're not even beer. In fact, they're ale cans. And this is very important because in 1960, when this was made, regular guys drank beer like you and me, but sophisticated men drank ale. It was lighter. It had a kind of uniqueness to it. It wasn't necessarily that much more expensive, but it had its own, obviously, particular qualities. In addition, you can see that while from a distance, if I go back one thing, from a distance, it looks as if they are really painted realistically. When you come up to them, you can see that they are, in fact, rather crudely painted, even though there's a precision to them, and it's kind of messy. In addition, they're not the same. Those X's, for example, are not exactly the same. The intersecting circles at the bottom are slightly different. The size of the ale itself, so on and so forth. So all of a sudden, what you see is not what you necessarily see. In addition, there's a kind of crudeness to the way the bronze, in fact, is made. Down below, you can see the base of the work, just like the base of the two cans are quite different as well. And what Johns loves, among other things, is this kind of sense of ambiguity, even to the notion that this is supposed to be fine art, but he's actually taking something so common as beer cans and elevating them to the levels of Michelangelo and the like. In addition, it seems so crude that an artisan or some kind of amateur could have made that base as opposed to so, quote unquote, a fine artist. But what is he doing? He's really looking back through history and looking back through those pieces of sculpture made by, for example, Egyptians, which were some of the first to actually make painted sculpture, and were less concerned, for example, about the base, as you can see under the feet of both of these figures. So these things are rooted in a long and deep tradition of making sculpture. But they also point to what is likewise so keen to Johns, and that is a kind of sense of difference or contestation. The two figures from the Egyptians seem to be, settled in their way, so to speak. But the two beer cans are curiously, yes, paired together, but obviously not the same. In fact, when you look at them, the one on the left-hand side has actually been opened. The one on the right-hand side is closed. Therefore, there is a kind of difference in terms of their use and their position in the present or the past tense. The one on the left-hand side is one step closer, so to speak, to the trash, whereas the one on the right-hand side stands stalwart and is ready to serve or be served, so to speak. The one on the left-hand side is sort of the after, and the one on the right-hand side is the before, reversing the normal notion of before and after. There is also the notion, too, that the two of them are, yes, they're paired. They're like kind of like a couple of guys, so to speak, sitting there, standing there, having a beer or looking out at us. There is also, too, in terms of the labels, which are terribly important, the labels down below actually reveal the three circles. It's hard to see here, but the circles say purity, body, and flavor. Now, this is important, of course, to the beer, which they contain or do not contain, as opposed to the one on the left-hand side. And they stand in contradistinction to another piece of sculpture that Johns knew and greatly admired by Henri Matisse here on the left-hand side, which also has a crude base like that. I draw your attention to it, but which is a female figure, her arm raised over her head. All of a sudden, the figures on the right-hand side seem much more male. They're columnar, they are solid, or at least the one on the right-hand side seems to be solid. Again, a kind of notion of contradiction between one empty and potentially one full. So that notion of somehow or other that both are both the same and yet different, both are male versus the female on the left-hand side, is also important because at the time that Johns made it, he actually was living with and lovers with Robert Rauschenberg there on the left-hand side in this photograph. So one can actually see these two beer cans as kind of stand-ins for themselves, something which is underscored by the fact that Johns and Rauschenberg obviously were gay. And in this particular instance, these beer cans were in theory made because William de Kooning, the great abstract expressionist artist, had said that Johns's dealer, Leo Castelli, a very sophisticated guy, was so good at selling Johns's work and other pop art that he could sell a beer can to some dumb collector. So John says, you know what? Maybe I'll try that out. And so he, in fact, makes these two as a kind of quiet, stalwart gesture to the Mad Hatter of abstract expressionism, William de Kooning, who himself was a big-time drinker. So as they stand there in their solemnity and look at us, they remind us, if we were back in the 50s and 60s, of all the ads that were for Ballantine. And here on the right-hand side, you can now see the purity, body, and flavor. I mean, how perfect a kind of disguise for two gay men. And all of the ads for them are all about being man, about buddies and about drinking together. Even here, the women are sequestered to the background, although look at those fabulous long dresses. In any case, but Ballantine also established a whole program. Reggie, I'm sure, would love this in terms of advertising things about who is the ale man. They had rock climbers, they had horsemen, they had deep sea divers, they had sailors. They even commissioned Ernest Hemingway and Steinbeck to be able to endorse their product. So it was both a cultural elevation as well as an emphasis upon the macho guys who are going to drink this ale. Well, it gets even better, and we have just a few minutes left. It gets even better because, as some of you from New York will know, Ballantine was in fact the beer of the Yankees. So John's is a lie. Here's in fact Don Larson in his one great game of 1956, the perfect game against the Dodgers in New York. He's throwing that ball underneath that Ballantine Ale sign, and with the clock on the right-hand side, reminding us of the importance of the allegiance of Ballantine with America's greatest franchise, i.e. the Yankees, pache to the Sox and other members of the National Baseball League. In any case, as some of you may know as well, and this is going to be the end of the story, that the voice of the Yankees was Mel Allen. I can still hear his voice. He had this terrific voice. I didn't know until I looked into this that actually Mel Allen, ironically, was born, ready for this, in Johns, Alabama. Now, how could you possibly have that occur? Tiny little town. He was very smart. He went to the University of Alabama, got through it in 3 years, went to law school, got that through that quickly, came to New York on a jaunt, and got a job with CBS in the 50s they were just sort of announcing things, and then got hooked up with the Yankees. Well, it turns out that actually his real name was Melvin Allen Israel. When he joined CBS in its somewhat anti-Semitic moment of that time, asked him to change his name. So he dropped Melvin and he dropped Israel. He therefore, if you will, suppressed his identity, much like Johns and Rauschenberg were suppressing their identity in the Ballantine Ale painted bronze down below. Mel Allen was also widely suspected of being gay. He lived with his mother in Greenwich, Connecticut for much of his life. He even showed up at a family wedding or family funeral in Alabama. This comes from one of his family members who told me this, with the chief of police of the Greenwich Police Department. He came without any relationship to the family, but came as one of Mel's friends. So how ironic would this be that you get Jasper Johns making a piece of sculpture that seems to be extraordinarily innocent, like Warhol's soup cans, but that is actually layered with all of this kind of meaning as a kind of way for him to assert his rightful place in the machismo world of abstract expressionism and in that contested hierarchy. There's one final irony, and that is, as you see down below, that base which I had drawn your attention to is also, in the end, a kind of acknowledgement of those gold bars from Fort Knox, obviously manipulated by Johns in his artful way. But I draw your attention to the labels up over here, that right there and that right there. Part of Ballantine's advertising was that this was Brewer's gold. I think we would all say that Williams, in the last minutes here, Williams is the gold standard. The Art Museum in particular, it's got 8 Jasper Johns prints. It doesn't have a piece of sculpture. There's only one of those in private hands, and that happens to be in Jasper Johns' hands itself. And as some of you may know, the college has just announced that it's going to be building a new museum up on the site of the old Williams Inn, that forsaken, horrible building that is now down. I would urge you to walk over there and look at the site. It's actually going to be built by an architectural firm out of New York, which was, as I say, just announced this past week. Soil is the name of the firm. SO stands for Solid Objective, and the IL are the initials of the 2 principals who we see here, a wonderful Chinese woman there upon the left and a Dutchman there upon the right. They recently built a museum at the University of California, Davis, which I show you here upon the right-hand side. They are an extremely interesting group. They are extraordinarily sensitive to environmental issues. In fact, the building here is a net zero building, something really important to Williams. It also has got a relationship to the buildings around it, which is going to be terribly important, even if it is going to be really extraordinarily novel, which I think will make for an amazing gateway into Williamstown itself. They're really sensitive to materials. This is a small art gallery that they built in South Korea. So we have much to look forward to in terms of burnishing and that gold standard that Williams has long held out for us. But in a final note, what I'd say is that if you're going to drink a Ballantine ale, drink it with a pal. If you're going to buy a Warhol, bring a lot of dough. If you're going to stand at a window, bring your pet. And if you're going to build a museum at Williams, bring your A game. Thanks very much.
Tuck, fantastic. Super. Tucker, you're the man. You're that man. We're gonna get a few questions for you. Are you up to it? You take a couple of questions.
I can't hear you, my friend.
Can you take a couple of questions? He can. Oh, I got to go over to the other mic here. Hold it. Tuck, can you take a couple of questions?
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah, now I can hear you.
All right, my friend. I think we're going to go for the man who every year, if he doesn't beat the first question he gets one of the highlights in. So I call on Bill Pitakowicz, the Pinkin. No, yeah, shoot it up and I'll relay.
Well, first of all, I want to say I'm gratified, having watched this, to learn that I'm not the only person who passed out on your shoulder in a taxi. At least I think it was you, and I think it was a taxi.
Reg?
Okay, he's pontificating. He could walk up here. I could give him the mic if you want. No, is that right or not? Right. Peggy, is this a long question? No, okay. Yeah.
It's not even a good one.
Oh, he can't hear you from there, actually.
Oh, can't hear me from here. Okay.
I'll just relay. Just relay it. Here's the question.
I was barely able to resist Googling this, but I need to know. Was it Monet or Monet who died of syphilis?
Do you get that?
Monet was such a prude. He never painted a nude in his life except for the one that I found deep in a closet in my grandparents' great attic. But it was Manet, unfortunately. And it was not a death that you would want.
And I love the way you take the most ridiculous questions and turn them into something valuable. Thank you.
He didn't disappoint. It was good. Right on thing. How about any other questions? Yeah. Yep.
What can museums do to compete with independent multi-billionaires' co-option of the art auction markets?
If I'm paraphrasing this correctly, Tuck, the question is about what can you do to handle the contrast between zillions of dollars and fine art and having it go through the roof? Is that basically it? Right. So you're saying where are they going to put them? Oh, yeah. So he's asking how are the museums going to compete to show this kind of art?
Yeah, there is unfortunately no way that a museum can compete in terms of just sheer acquisitions. There's just no way. If you're going to be buying that kind of thing, one of the ways that you can at least stay in the game, and which has always been not just an option or an alternative, but a necessity for every museum, is to develop relationships with those people who, in fact, are making all this money. They need places like Williams to be able to understand the value of the cultural world and the commitment and responsibility of those who are in fact privileged to be able to stand at the top of the pyramid of our economic system, to be able to really assist in broadening the base for it. It's a tough nut to crack, but it is an absolutely necessary one. There are some healthy indications. I mean, look at, for example, outside the world of museums, Mr. Geffen. Mr. Geffen made a ton of money in music here in California. He gave $150 million to the Lincoln Center. And there's going to be a transfer of wealth of enormous proportions over the next number of decades that hopefully museums will be able to be participants in. But it's a very tough road to hoe, there's no doubt. And I think we simply have to make sure that even within our own community, as this museum itself is going to rise from the ground, that we too support it in the best ways that we can.
Thank you. Good question. Oh, is that John? Jerry. Oh, Jerry. I'm sorry, Jerry. Go ahead. You want to come there? Yeah.
So, Tuck, one of the ironies of the situation is that the high prices the art, commands, devalues the art as art. That is, the general public becomes interested in how much it sells for as opposed to what it is as a work of art. So as a, educator in the field, how do you think that shift may be made back to a public that sees it as something giving multiple pleasures as opposed to being something that earns a lot of money?
Right. That's an excellent question, and a difficult one to answer on a practical level. I mean, there's certain things that can occur. I mean, for example, I do think that education in museums is critical, absolutely critical. That's why I started with the Toledo. It was so critical for me. And for that kind of engagement with individual works of art in a limited, controlled environment is essential. And how can that occur? Well, it could occur in terms of educational policies, in terms of museums, the way in which they deploy their resources, both financially as well as in terms of personnel. Where are they going to place that kind of educational strength? There's also a notion, and this is why it's so interesting about the design of this new museum for Williams, because even the ways in which the museum is structured, conceived of, and built is going to be really important. I insisted, after years of sitting on the committee for the Williams College Art Museum for the visiting committee, that there be in this museum places that you can go and look at one or two works of art, not feel like you have to see everything, and that communion with a particular work of art will stay with you and will generate other kinds of interest. And this does happen, or it used to happen. For example, Bob Kraft, the head of the owner of the Patriots, went to Columbia. Everybody makes one mistake in life. And he took an art history course, and he said to me that I own the El Greco at the Met. I was like, what? You actually bought it? You own it? He says, no. He says, I had to go and write a paper on a painting at the Met, and I wrote it on the El Greco, and to this day, I feel I own that painting. And I thought that was wonderful. And if that kind of stimulus, that kind of connection, that sense ultimately of the power of the work of art can be removed from its economic embrace or shell, then we can get to the heart of that matter. There's no doubt that we live in an age where that kind of challenge is enormous because money is just infiltrated everything. But I do believe that it is possible, and I sincerely hold out that hope.
We have time for one more question, and I think the best is we have come up here.
Well, I can shout it to you.
Go ahead.
I just finished reading The Empire of Pain. About
The Empire of Pain?
Yes, about the Sackler family. And bad people with a lot of fabulous art.
How do you justify that? Did you hear about that Empire of Pain? And there's a lot of people looking for why the hell, how do you justify this in today's art world?
Yeah, given the number of problems that we have in the world, I find it almost impossible to justify it. I mean, really impossible, except with the romantic, perhaps, or at least educated, bound notion of responsibility. I mean, eventually, the $195 million Warhol, I would like to think, will end up in a museum, and that there will be a sense of access to those works. In terms of the actual money, I would like to think, I'd like to hope that, like Bill Gates's wife, Melinda, or ex-wife Melinda, and like Warren Buffett, that they will look at the enormous privilege that they've been able to experience and share the wealth that that they've accrued because of that. You can't force those things upon people. But at the same time, I think that if there's a kind of moral imperative that can be voiced and demonstrated, that the costs of homelessness, for example, in California, or poverty around the world, or the problems that are going to be occurring in Ukraine hopefully after this war, or whatever, need to be addressed in the same way that this pursuit of essentially these trophies has been exercised. This isn't necessarily a new game per se, because it's always been this way. But it's just that the ante has been upped enormously, percentages have grown exponentially, and therefore the division, just like the division in society as a whole between the haves and the have-nots, has grown in a painful fashion.
Tuxter, you're the best. Thank you. What do we say? How about a hand for it?
Thank you, guys.
That's a full thank you.
Thank you so much, really. Thank you, thank you.
Okay.
Rich, right there. So, Tuck, Peterson here. A question for you. Are there any long-lost Monets that you haven't seen?
Well, just like the one I got 2 weeks ago, that one was not lost. There are a couple that Monet painted over 2,000 pictures, so about 2,200. So they're inevitably ones that I have not seen. But there was one, I was just in Japan a month ago, and there was one that had actually been purchased directly from Monet by a Japanese man who had formed a terrific collection, and it disappeared in Japan. There were rumors that, in fact, it had been bought by the Japanese mafia and that they were holding it for ransom or whatever else. Well, lo and behold, it actually had suffered terrible damage. And it's now on display at the Museum of National Western Art, but as a kind of damaged painting. It was the first time I had ever seen it. It was extremely painful. There are pictures still in private hands that are reproduced only in black and white photographs. We hope that they're still in good condition and that we will see them someday. But I certainly, over the course of our time together, if there's something of that kind that comes out, I think we should all enjoy a blast email saying, here is a long lost Monet that didn't occur or wasn't found in Tucker's grandparents' attic, but here in X, Y, or Z. It'd be great to share.
I have news for you. We found one. We've had a docent taking a look in the dumpster behind Giverny, and we found it. We're a little concerned because it looks like it's signed by a guy named Claude Money, and but it's nicely framed. I think it would look just fine in your bathroom, and we're sending it to you whether Maggie wants it or not. So thank you again.
That's right. Does it come with a small European male bathing suit?
So Tuck, we got to depart. You'll be missed in the next few days. We love you.
Thank you so much. Enjoy yourselves. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you. Yeah.